Thank you, James, for that generous introduction. Great. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my talk. Thank you for staying back for it. I'm Prasad, and if you remember from my bus talk, I am an applied game designer and a researcher. Applied games, when we hear this word, like all of us know that these are the games with some more purpose or having a specific application behind their design. They're also called as serious games, and sometimes they're also made fun of as the boring ones. And to be honest, it happens. Like most of the applied games, I can vouch for them that they end up being something which is very specific in their own nature. And to be honest, it's very hard to design a game, and then it's even harder when you are designing a game with a particular application in mind. What I'm going to talk here today about is further harder challenge of designing a game when your clients are coming from non-game background and the audience who's going to play these games are people who don't usually play games. So far I've worked with a bunch of startups, research labs, design studios, and a bunch of NGOs designing hybrid tabletop as well as digital applied games. They've been in the fields of education, social safety, ecology, scientific outreach, social development, healthcare. So I'm going to use some of these examples as we go along, and particularly what I'm sharing here is some of my learning or some of the insights that I have gathered for designing these kinds of games. I'm calling them as 7.5 lessons just to make them sound snappy and probably make them slightly more memorable, but let's see how it goes. So let's get started. The very first insight that I want to share here is, I'm articulating it as understanding the role that the game is supposed to play. So as I said, these are applied games. They have a very specific purpose behind it. But usually when I've seen clients approaching with a game design requirement, they mostly are looking at games as something which is unique, attractive, interactive for their audience. They also consider that mostly the clients who are coming from, say, social development sector or from NGO background. So they're also considering games to be interpreted as something which is easy, simple, playful, also sometimes nostalgic for their audience to interact with. Most of the, say, client-side team, people are not gamers, or even if they are gamers, then their sort of choice of or preference of genres need not always match with the kind of genre that will make most out of the applied objective that we're trying to deal with. Sometimes they have like examples or sort of preferences towards highly traditional and popular sort of games like Snakes and Ladders, Ludo, or Fortnite, which again may or may not fit into the requirement that we are dealing with. That's where I think as designers, it is our job to sort of help them educate about different attributes of the games and different affordances that games can offer in this space. At the same time, they are the subject matter experts about the area in which these games are being designed. And that's why every applied game design project is always a co-learning, co-creation kind of an endeavor. And I think that it can get a good head start if this bit is achieved. So what I mean by understanding the role that the game is supposed to play is here, since the game is being looked at as an application, whatever the client comes with as a requirement needs to be turned into a game design brief. So for example, here, when we were working with this particular client who wanted to design games for conveying the importance of high school education for girls in rural parts of India, we turned it into a brief where we decided to treat these games as conversation starters among Indian rural families, so that people who are playing these games can bring their beliefs and thoughts as they play these games to the table. Taking another example, I worked with this lab which was trying to convert these regular speech pathology tests, which are meant for patients of neurological diseases such as ALS or Parkinson's, into something playful, because they wanted these people to do it slightly more often than they do these tests. Now here again, understanding the role of the game here, into the lives of patients with neurological diseases, we decided to treat them as playful activities which can be done in their daily routines instead of calling them as regular speech pathology tests. It may come across as like just some wordplay, but trust me, if like such articulation is done in the beginning of the project, it helps in anchoring the whole project until its culmination. Moving further, the second point is about understanding and making use of the ecosystem and its stakeholders wherein these games are going to exist. You might have heard or seen lots of applied games are a part of a bunch of workshops which happen on field, and these workshops usually have facilitators. So they can be banked upon for helping players to understand the complex rules of playing the game. They can also be considered or enabled to do certain kind of debriefs or reflection sessions after the game for all players to understand what exactly happened during the game. Similarly, sometimes there can be other stakeholders. Going back to that example of games for patients with neurological diseases, here we have this particular patient having ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. So these patients, in case of these patients, we really don't know at which stage of the disease progression they might be. So based on that, they may or may not be able to hold and operate the device on which the game is going to function. But in that case, their caregivers can come into the picture. And since the caregivers are around them, the game can be designed such that it becomes an experience which can be mutually explored by the patient as well as the caregiver. So what I'm trying to say here is that if we decide to make use of this ecosystem or the environment in which the games are going to exist, we can come up with different and more effective ideas about applied games. Moving on to the third lesson. Here, remember, we are talking about the audience who don't usually play games. And that's why even if they're in a workshop setup where they're sort of obliged to play a game, they may not really be wanting to play it. In such a case, how do we drive their attention, or how do we make sure that they actively get involved in the game? One bit that can help is to craft the game objective such that it resonates with the audience. Now, what do I mean by that? So again, going back to the example of games for patients with ALS, here, this particular game is coming across as a simple puzzle, which can be solved just by tap on a screen, or it asks you to make certain sounds using like your voice. So these are being turned into simple, playful activities, which can be just added into your daily routine. So imagine as if like reading a newspaper and solving a crossword puzzle. Another example, the game that you see on the left is a game that was meant to garner some research data and at the same time spread awareness about sexual reproductive health related information amongst adolescent girls and young women. And in this case, again, we were not sure whether this particular audience will be interested in playing a game and sort of answering certain questions to give us some data. So the game is designed such that it is interspersed in a long format film, and here the motivation for this particular audience is the film, the story that they want to be completed. And for that to happen, they're going through small parts of games in which they themselves are creating a film. So if the objective of why you are doing that activity, the playful activity, resonates with the audience while they're doing that activity, they get involved into it slightly bit better. In the same context of catching, say, audience's interest or making them feel more motivated to take part in this activity, one bit that can help is of providing all the participants or the players specific roles, and rather within those roles, how they can feel meaningful agency. An example here is from a game which is a part of a series of games designed to explain HIV, its diagnosis, and its treatments. Now, while playing this game, players are playing as this particular character, which is on the left side, who is the immunity. So since they're playing as immunity, they can firsthand experience what exactly happens to the human body when the virus attacks. And this can help in two levels. One, because there is a very clear role, they get more interested into the game. And secondly, it also helps us to go back to the lesson one and achieve that specific objective that we have, the applied objective that we have from the game. Cool, time to talk about time. So this is something which we rarely consider when we are talking about games which are meant for entertainment. But in case of applied games, if they're being played as a part of a workshop setup, then there is a limitation of the total amount of time that is available to play the game. Sometimes if our audiences consist of people like patients of ALS, they may have limited energy levels, and then we have limited time that we can spend with them. Or, since, if you remember, I was mentioning that these are the audiences who don't usually play games. So they may take time to decipher and understand how to use certain game controls and how sort of proceed further in the game. All of this sort of eats into the time that we have to sort of engage with this particular user. And that's where considering this time aspect can actually help us design better games. So it's almost like choreographing our audience's gameplay against a checklist that we can have in our mind. For example, I'll go back to this another game from the series of games which was which is designed around HIV. So this particular mini game is related to the antiretroviral therapy treatment. Some of you might be aware about it. So in this treatment, or in this particular, say, ART therapy, there are 3 lines of defenses, 3 different kinds of medications which are available. And while audiences are playing this game, we designed it such that players who have good dexterity, they may go across certain lines of defenses, while players who don't have that level of dexterity may not cover all those lines of defenses. But that's fine, because we're using lesson number 2 of using the ecosystem, because these games are being played in a group setup. So even if like the people with good dexterity and bad dexterity are playing together, so they'll discover different parts of the game, and as a part of a debrief, they'll be able to share what exactly happened in the game, and collectively they would have ticked all the boxes related to the applied objectives that we have in our mind. This particular lesson or insight is slightly generic. It can be considered for all applied games, I would say, but they also become like quite important when it comes to these games which are being played by people who don't usually play games. And it is about careful review of metaphors and their messages. So again, I'll take the example of the same antiretroviral therapy game. So while ideating this game, we came up with an idea of ART being shown as some sort of a mystical fruit coming from a mystical forest, and that can trap the HIV at some stage in the game. But when we were discussing this idea with the subject matter experts, they pointed it out that this can get interpreted by the audience that we were looking at. The audience was supposed to be rural, say, populations in India and Africa. They may interpret this as the medicine that is given by a quack doctor in their village. So that's something which was very important for us to consider, and that's why we decided to iterate further on that particular concept. Which brings us to the 7th lesson of iterative game design. We have heard about this, or probably we follow this in all kinds of games that we design. But the key bit here is to playtest the game with diverse set of playtesters. And how I have usually found it useful to go about is this, that at the first level, just discussing the gameplay concepts, like walking the client-side subject matter experts through these concepts, so as to catch issues like the quack doctor one that I just now mentioned. Taking that forward, moving on, like once the gameplay concept is locked or it's frozen, then working out sort of storyboards or visual narratives of how the game will actually be played is again helpful to share with the extended team from the client side, so that everybody has a vision of what exactly this game is going to be about. Moving on, creating low fidelity prototypes and playing them in parts and full definitely helps, and particularly if we play these games with teams from the client side who have experience of being on the field, helps in getting very detailed and specific feedback about, again, like very detailed and like specific parts of the game to improve that further. At this stage, it's also beneficial to make some gamers play the game so that we can be sure that the game is not breaking anywhere, or if there are any other glitches. And lastly, after going through this whole cycle, a high fidelity prototype can be made available, which is ready for a pilot trial. So those were the 7 sort of insights that I wanted to share, and I think now is the time for the additional half insight, and the distinction is because I think the first 7 are slightly more design oriented, they can be immediately put into use, but this one is something which is sort of like my personal thought, and it's about having a personal purpose behind designing these games. So as we know, applied games, all of them mostly have a purpose behind them, and sometimes that purpose may or may not align with the lines of thoughts of the designer who's designing them. Most of these projects deal with very sensitive and very intense topics. They run over longer periods of times. Sometimes like people may underestimate the amount of efforts that go into a project like this. Sometimes they may not pay you well. At times, people around us may question our motives to be a part of a project like this. So all of this basically can cause a lot of confusion, and that's where I feel having a designerly purpose to be a part of a project like this can be helpful. So just to share, like when I was working on a project in which we're designing games for people with visual impairments back in India, I was asked this question by a fellow researcher that these people with visual impairment, they are not able to even deal with their basic survival needs, then why are you trying to take care of their recreational needs? And that question stayed with me. I was trying to wonder that obviously I'm not able to resolve that through the game that I'm designing. And it is quite difficult to earn a decent livelihood if you're a person with impairment over there back in India. But whenever I was going to the field to playtest the prototypes that I was making, I would meet individuals like this one who would be thoroughly enjoying that playtest as a small refreshing break from their regular routine and the struggle that they're going through. And that's something that became my purpose to work on these games. So purposes like this can help in keeping us going on these projects. So that's all. As a brief summary, these are the 7.5 lessons about designing applied games for the audience that doesn't play games, and I hope you will find them useful to use them in your own work, or they might also give you some ideas about collaborations or some future work. That's all from my side. Thanks a lot.